Welcome to Grid Live Wrap Up. McLaren claims their Constructors Championship after a dramatic race start. A chaotic Formula E season opening race saw the defending champion upside down. Ben Schneider from Grid Encore, LastCar.info, and Isha Azim from Racing with Isha join us today. I'm Joe Samniego. A big thank you to our Patreon investors, Colin, Deshelle, Mark, Robin, David, and Matthew for investing in the Grid Network each and every month. You can invest in us, get us ready for 2025. You can also do a one-time investment through Buy Me a Coffee or YouTube Super Chat. We'll thank you on the air. Let's get started. Formula One, the 2024 season has ended, and McLaren has claimed the Constructors Championship from the pole. Lando Norris, we talked a little bit about this, Isha. What kind of race will he have? He led lap one, rest of the way, just holding off everybody, including a Ferrari 2-3 finish. Piastri got spun that first lap. Contact from Max Verstappen on the inside. Never got really side by side. We saw a penalty from Max Verstappen. Piastri got a penalty later on for a separate issue, but he still was able to come back to 10th place, score 1 point. They hold off Ferrari by 14 points to claim the Constructors Championship. Starting with you, one of the things we heard on the cool-down lap, Isha, was Lando saying, I want to get the Drivers' Championship next year. With the off-season, is this the time for McLaren to start preparing for what could be an intense 2025 season?
Yes, certainly, Joe. They ended this season on a great note. They won the constructor standings. And I think that McLaren, everyone, all the crew, everybody at McLaren, the drivers, everyone is just going to be so energized and so focused on making sure that 2025 starts with their best foot forward. They're going to try to use as many advantages as they can. Ending this season on such a good note, I'm sure that they're going to carry that over into the start of the 2025 season. And they're going to spend this off-season time trying their hardest to make sure that everything's in order, everything's going perfectly. And I think that, they're just going to start off 2025 with their best foot forward.
Yeah, they better start 2025 off with their best foot forward. And I just went back and I looked at the full results, full standings for the year. McLaren only had one podium in the first 4 races this season. This has been McLaren's Achilles heel. They've never been able to start the season nearly as strong as they finished it. Even the last couple of years before they were winning the constructors outright, they always took a long time to even some years so much as finish in the points, and then they would get points finishes, then work their way up to the podium. This year they started in the points, a couple of 6th place, 8th place finishes, podium in Australia, and then obviously Lando Norris winning in round 6 in Miami really jump-started their year, and we thought maybe he would take the fight to Max Verstappen and win the Drivers' Championship. Obviously, Max pulled ahead there at the end as well on that side of things. But if McLaren can start the season as strong as they've ended this season, winning the Constructors' Championship for the first time since 1998, I think they'll be a force to be reckoned with, and I think Lando Norris could very well take the fight to Max Verstappen, or maybe even Oscar Piastri as well. I think we forget just how young Oscar Piastri is and just how young Lando Norris is as well, to be fair. They both, I think, have their best years ahead of them in Formula One, and we'll see if they can take the fight to Max and Red Bull in 2025.
What's going to be really interesting next year, I think McLaren, they have the potential to have a good fast start because, like you said, Ben, that's been one of their weaknesses. The one thing I'm a little bit concerned of, if we see Oscar Piastri out-qualify Lando Norris or something like that, it's a clean slate. Whoever's the fastest, hopefully no team orders, but it'll be really interesting to see how it's going to develop because this year, that was a bit of a weakness for them. Hungary, of course, comes to mind. A lot of mistakes, but they overcame it all to claim Constructor Championship. A lot of celebration. We even saw the drone light show with the McLaren logo up in the sky. But we didn't see really anything celebrating about Max Verstappen's championship. We didn't even see him go to the front stretch to do burnouts. We saw Lewis Hamilton do a burnout with that Mercedes. So, Ben, were you surprised by the lack of ceremonies celebrating Max Verstappen's championship?
Not really. I mean, he's already had his moment of the spotlight. He'd already clinched the championship weeks earlier. championship was already decided. I think all the focus today was on the battle between McLaren and Ferrari. And if there was anybody that was in the spotlight aside from those two teams and those four drivers, it was obviously Lewis Hamilton and his tenure at Mercedes from the last 12 seasons coming to an end there. Max, I think, was mostly an afterthought. Everybody knew that he was already world champion, and then he certainly didn't earn a lot of right to celebrate, I think, based on what happened in turn one, taking out Oscar Piastri and almost playing a hand in who might take the constructors fight. You know, obviously McLaren, if you could choose to be anybody going into this weekend, you would certainly choose to be McLaren with how much of an advantage they had. But Ferrari certainly did everything within their power, within their capability. I mean, Lando Norris was really one puncture away from falling out of the points. Ferrari would have had a 1-2. They would have taken the constructors, and Max Verstappen would have had a big part to play in that based on what happened in turn one with Oscar Piastri. So I don't think really anybody was really thinking about Max, not to, disrespect him as a talent. Obviously, he's a 4-time defending world champion now and could well make it 5 again next year. We'll see. But I wasn't too surprised that there wasn't too much focus on him this weekend. I think everybody was all in on the constructors and all in on looking back on Lewis's tenure with Mercedes.
Yeah, I agree with Ben. Not much more to add there. Had the championship for the driver standings been decided today and Max had won, it would have been celebrated way more. But because it had already been decided, everybody was looking forward to seeing who'd win the constructors, and I think that's where the majority of the celebrations went. I think that it also comes down to the driver too. Max isn't one to celebrate really big, and it is his 4th championship as well. So I think there were a few different factors at play. But the biggest one of them was probably that it was already known that he was the champion coming into this race.
Yeah, when you have the championship wrapped up, I get it. It's like, okay, we're gonna follow what's left, the constructors this year. I was just sort of surprised. I was like, okay, I thought he was going to do a burnout there too, from the fans, just pulled in the pits for Red Bull. Not exactly that great of a day at all, really, at Abu Dhabi. And of course, another close battle was in the Constructors Championship, 6th place. Alpine claimed the position with Gasly finishing 7th ahead of Nico Hülkenberg. Magnussen and the 2 V-Carb drivers did not score points. So unfortunately, this just allowed Alpine to get that position. Jack Doohan making his debut also did not score points. And the defining moment for Alpine has to be the double podium finish on a wet Brazilian Grand Prix. For Sergio Perez, another poor race, ended on lap 1 with an early spin. Contact forced him out of the race on lap 1. And his future with Red Bull pretty much unknown. I think it's safe to say Red Bull essentially lost his Constructor Championship and even 2nd place because of Perez's inability to score points. Last 16 races, only 45 points. That is just a lousy effort. Isha, Red Bull 2025, do they have an uphill battle against McLaren, Ferrari, and I'll even throw in Mercedes as well?
Yes, Joe, I definitely think so. If McLaren, Ferrari, and Mercedes are able to maintain the pace that they had in the later half of the season, and if they're able to improve on it, Red Bull is certainly going to have a tough time winning the constructors, and I think even the driver standings, it could be. And as you mentioned, a big factor in that is also Sergio Perez. Sergio Perez is, as we saw today, he also DNF'd. It's really difficult to hope or think that Red Bull could maybe win the constructors next season, given that Max Verstappen's the only one scoring the majority of the points. And then you have teams like McLaren and Ferrari where you're going to have both drivers who are very capable of scoring points, and with Mercedes as well. So I think that Red Bull is certainly going to have a tough time next season. If McLaren, Ferrari, and Mercedes are able to keep up the pace they had this season, if they're able to go into the start of the season with this pace, because we know, as Ben pointed out earlier, that especially with McLaren, they start off the season a little bit tough, and then they build their way up throughout the rest of the races. But, I think the start of the season is going to be key for these 3 teams if they are looking to beat Red Bull once again.
Joe, that was an incredible way of putting it there. I didn't realize just how badly Checo had the last 2/3 of the season here. And forgive me, I'm just kind of flustered because I'm trying to do the math in my head here and make sure. So Imola was round 7. He finished 8th there. After that race, he was on 107 points. He finishes with 152. So yeah, that's the last 15 races, 45 points. So he averaged 3 points a race for basically 2/3 of the season here. That is unbelievable in a season where Max Verstappen marched away with his 4th championship. I mean, it's unacceptable, to be quite frank. And listen, nobody's been a bigger defender of Sergio Perez. I mean, I picked him to finish 2nd in the standings again this year at the start of the season, because he did that last year, even though he had some troubles and some difficulties, some ups and downs in 2023. He ultimately got the job done, ultimately gave Red Bull their first ever 1-2 finish in the driver's standings. And, looked like he was well on his way to doing that again this year. He had a runner-up in Bahrain, Saudi Arabia. Obviously, Max had the issue in Australia. Checo was back in 5th, but then came back with 2 more podiums in Japan and China, and then a 4th place in Miami. And then really after that, the wheels just fell off there. He was never even really close to a podium finish again in a season where Max Verstappen was still maybe not as dominant as he was the last couple of years, but still capable of winning races on most given weekends here throughout the Formula One season. So to answer the question, forgive me again, I've just, hadn't thought of it that way, but it's a stunning way to look at it. And it really puts into perspective just how poor Checo's form was here. I mean, he can't be the 2nd driver next year. There's no way around it. I know I think finally for the first time today, this weekend, he acknowledged, we'll talk about it. We'll come to a decision here in the coming days and weeks. But, he says he's got a contract. Yeah, the only thing that I could maybe think of is Max Verstappen pulls Nico Rosberg and shocks the world and says, you know what, I really have had enough on board. I want to go do something else, whether that's iRacing or sports car endurance racing or whatever. If he does walk away, which I believe there's a less than 0.1% chance of that happening, maybe Red Bull says, we can't have 2 rookie drivers, or at least 2 rookie drivers within the senior team. I know they could promote, Tsunoda's been there for a few years now at RB. Maybe we need a veteran in the paddock. Maybe Checo could be that guy. That's the only way I see Checo keeping his seat, is if Max doesn't have the number 1 seat next year. And again, I think the odds of Max walking away at this point are slim to none. So, it's going to be interesting to see what they do. But, if they do somehow, some way retain Checo Perez, if he can't find a way to rediscover that form from the last couple of years before this one, I think you can pretty much kiss the Constructors Championship goodbye. I think we have 3 very strong teams. I'm very excited to see what Mercedes can do now that George Russell is going to be the undisputed number 1. We'll see what Kimi Antonelli can do as a rookie, but McLaren and Ferrari, I'm sure, are going to be coming back as strong as ever. It's going to be an uphill battle for sure, even regardless, I think, of who's in that 2nd car. And if it's Checo again, I think it's going to be very difficult for me to envision any possible way, unless there's a miraculous turnaround, that he could, help them win the Constructors Championship.
On the post-race show for Formula One, Will Buxton predicted Liam Lawson will be alongside Max Verstappen.
I don't know. I think Lawson's got a lot of potential, but what would Yuki Tsunoda think of that? This is a guy that's he's been in this team for 4 years now, and you're going to take a guy who has, a couple of fill-in appearances and less than half of a full season's worth of races, and say he's the guy ahead of somebody who's been there for multiple years now and has had some strong runs. I feel like if anybody's more deserved, not to say that Lawson isn't going to get there eventually and doesn't have that potential, but if you're going to promote somebody next year, I don't understand how Yuki couldn't be that guy.
It's going to be so interesting to see how this all develops with Red Bull, because I feel with Sergio Perez, he was brought onto Red Bull because he had such a good final year at, I believe it was Racing Point. Well, it was the first India where he got the win. Oh, he was on his way out. Well, he lands with Red Bull, gets wins, 2nd place last year. This year, this is not that same Sergio Perez. This is beyond bad. I mean, it almost started to feel just like you just knew it was just, what is he going to mess up this week? From last week, not going with the light turn green at the end of pit road. This week, someone could say it was out of his control to contact and crashing out. But again, it just, I think, really sums up what's been a lousy season.
Yeah, and Joe, I want to correct the record here. Forgive me. Like I said, it's been a long season, and that fact took me by surprise. I can't do math in my head right now, but 24 minus 7 is 17. So in 17 races, he only scored 45 points. I mean, it's just, it's an astonishing way of looking at it. And like I said, I think, the status quo at the very least cannot be what Red Bull walks into 2025 with. But Checo, again, he says he has a contract. Maybe the team could use him as a simulator driver or a reserve role, or an ambassador for the company or whatever. But he cannot be the number 2 driver of the senior team next year. There's just no way around it.
It'll be interesting to see, because with that driver lineup, I would have no confidence in the Constructors Championship. It was, again, Perez, Verstappen. We know Verstappen could go out there and get wins if he has a good car. But the other teams, the fact that the other teams even all had 1-2 finishes, what a year. And of course, for Mercedes, it's going to be very different next year, because Lewis Hamilton would not be alongside George Russell. Today in his last race, he came from 16th to 4th place in the final race of Mercedes, passing George Russell on the final lap. Next year, he goes off to Ferrari. First time he'll be driving a car without a Mercedes power unit. Carlos Sainz, his last race with Ferrari. He was my pick a winner. 2nd place. Overall, pretty good race, but just not enough to overcome Lando Norris the entire race. Charles Leclerc, we saw his performance from, I believe, 19th, come up to 3rd. Valiant effort. Some races he doesn't do that great. Same with Lewis Hamilton this year, had some good races, but George Russell overall was a little bit better. Do you feel, because Lewis has those championships, that resume, that Charles Leclerc next year has to step it up to sort of prove where he is with Ferrari and his stand, because Lewis Hamilton's coming?
Yeah, well, I don't know. On a day where he went from 19th on the grid to 3rd, it's kind of hard to say, Leclerc's got to do even more. He's got to step it up. I think he's certainly capable of that, but he has to make sure that he's performing at his top level and leaving nothing out there on the track. Obviously having a 7-time world champion who still, as we saw today, Lewis had a great drive through the field himself to come back to 4th, including passing his teammate George Russell on the last lap. Lewis certainly hasn't forgotten how to drive, and as we saw this year, he also hasn't forgotten how to win. He just needs a car capable of giving him that possibility, and I think he's going to have that at Ferrari next year. So that dynamic, that battle is going to be very, very interesting. That's probably what I'm looking forward to the most, not just how Lewis Hamilton gets on at his new team, his new home at Scuderia Ferrari, but also Charles Leclerc, obviously, who's been kind of the face of that team and that franchise for the last several years now. With, again, no disrespect to Carlos Sainz, who's a great talent in his own right, but everybody has known, and Carlos even admitted it himself, like it was hard to be too mad, because you knew that if Lewis Hamilton was available and Ferrari was going to sign him, that they weren't going to get rid of Leclerc, right? So Leclerc is very highly rated, as he should be at Ferrari, but he's going to have, a massive target on his back with a 7-time champion coming into that team next year. And so, again, I think it's totally well within his capabilities, but he has to make sure he goes out and proves himself next year. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, the way I see it, I think it's interesting to think about this, but I feel like Leclerc improving isn't going to make much of a difference. When you have a 7-time world champion as your teammate, Lewis Hamilton, I think the majority of Ferrari's attention and focus is going to be towards Lewis Hamilton. So I think that no matter how Charles Leclerc performs, obviously he needs to still perform well, but I think that a lot of the focus is going to be towards Lewis Hamilton. And I think there are going to be a lot of moments where Charles Leclerc may be asked to compromise or give up a position or something for Lewis Hamilton, because the whole point of bringing Hamilton over to Ferrari was to secure another driver's championship for him. And I think that Ferrari may treat it, I think Lewis Hamilton is definitely going to be treated as the number 1 driver by Ferrari. And I think it's going to be difficult for the dynamic between the 2 drivers, because as Ben pointed out, Charles Leclerc has been the face of Ferrari for quite some time. But with Lewis Hamilton being thrown into the mix, I think it's going to make things difficult. And I think that Charles Leclerc may find himself in Lewis Hamilton's shadow at times. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see how the relationship between the 2 drivers and with the team plays out next season.
Very interesting to see how it all plays out. We cannot wait to see Lewis Hamilton behind the wheel of a Ferrari F1 car. That's going to be coming up, and of course, 2025, just around the corner, the 2024 season. Looking back on it, It looked like it was going to be one of those Max Verstappen Red Bull domination years. I remember last year being how quite often first lap, first corner, if Max Verstappen had the lead, you would just in our internal chat, and Max Verstappen has won with pretty much a success rate of just about 100% last year. But we saw the changes throughout the year, and this season, 7 drivers winning multiple races. That's the most for a season in F1. 4 teams with a 1-2 finish during the year. Back when Sergio Perez was performing, that no more 1-2 finishes later on. Some drivers, of course, didn't make it to the end of the season. Daniel Ricciardo, replaced by Liam Lawson for not performing. Logan Sargent, replaced. Franco Colapinto came in. And Esteban Ocon, very last race, replaced by Jack Dohan. Lawson, Colapinto, both of them having mixed success. I think at the end, Colapinto, the last few races, another DNF, mechanical issues. Liam Lawson, I think from the surprise of last year when he substituted for an injured Daniel Ricciardo, got some momentum, but not like what they had hoped for. And of course, as we talked about earlier, the fall of Sergio Perez, Aston Martin struggling the second half of the year, especially after last year where Fernando Alonso was getting themselves podium after podium. Nothing this year. And unfortunately, the FIA drama, which has been getting in the picture as well to overshadow the last few race weekends with everything going on in the FIA. Isha, starting with you, how will you remember the 2024 F1 season?
You know, as we were talking about it yesterday during the pre-race show, I think the best way to think about it was as a roller coaster. Everything started even before the season started, you know, with all the silly season drama. There was so much drama and chaos at the start of the season, and I think it gave way to the fact that, you know, the rest of the season was going to be insane, very chaotic, very dramatic, but also very entertaining. We had some insanely high highs, you know, with a lot of drivers getting amazing wins, like Charles Leclerc in Monaco, Lewis Hamilton with the British Grand Prix, and then Carlos Sainz after his appendectomy, you know, coming back and winning that race as well. And then we also had some very low lows, as you pointed out. You know, we had to say goodbye to some very loved drivers. Saw some new faces, some new rookies. So this season, from beginning to end, was just an insane roller coaster. And I don't think at any point of the season you could tell which way things were going to go. So I think it was very, very entertaining. And it was a really nice surprise compared to the past few seasons and how they had gone to where it's just Red Bull domination from point A to Z. So I think this was a really entertaining and roller coaster season.
Yeah, you know, it's funny how things work sometimes in this sport. You know, I remember in 2021 when we got that epic battle between Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen. I feel like Max was kind of the crowd favorite because Lewis had won, my goodness, I guess 6 of the last 7 championships. Mercedes had won all of the last 7 constructors, and everybody wanted somebody to take the fight to them. And that ended up being Max Verstappen, and he ended up taking the fight and winning the championship in Abu Dhabi that year in very controversial circumstances, not to open that can of worms again. But, you know, over the last couple of years, Max Verstappen's now become a dominant force in this sport. And I think he's kind of now seen as the villain of Formula One. And now everybody's trying to rally behind Lando Norris and McLaren, or maybe Charles Leclerc and Ferrari, or maybe it's going to come full circle. Maybe it'll be Lewis Hamilton and Ferrari next year, and see who can knock Max Verstappen off his throne here. So I think, you know, especially now that we've gotten a taste of that with Red Bull kind of falling back towards the second half, McLaren coming up to win the Constructors, Ferrari being second in the Constructors, the ingredients are all there for an epic season in 2025 before major regulation change. Not much unlike what we had in 2021, ironically enough. We're going to get this great season perhaps, and then they're going to change the regulations on us, and maybe we'll go back to seeing one team dominate everything. But I think this season certainly set us up for a lot of great storylines next year. I remember at the end of 2023 kind of dreading the start of this season because I figured, and it did really look like at the start of the year, it was going to be more of the same, just a Max Verstappen show with him dominating and winning almost every race. And of course, the second half of the year, we were treated to something different. And I'm hopeful, again, that McLaren can start the year on the right foot in 2025, that Ferrari come back strong with that driver pairing of Leclerc and Hamilton, and even that Mercedes can kind of try to recapture some of that magic. I think we have a big 4 now. I think we have 4 teams As you mentioned, Joe, all 4 of them got 1-2s at certain points this year. As much as Lewis was complaining about how awful that Mercedes car was at times this year, there were tracks where Mercedes looked unstoppable, namely even Vegas just a couple of weeks ago when they got that 1-2 finish and Lewis was able to charge for the field. So I think there are so many different track types now on the schedule that benefit each of these 4 different teams in different ways. I think we could have an epic season next year, and I think we'll look back on this season as kind of laying the foundation for those storylines that we're hopefully going to get here in 2025.
And the potential next year too, Adrian Newey with Aston Martin, be interested to see how that turns out as well. Overall, from the first race where it just Max Verstappen, Red Bull again, to the last few races, especially Las Vegas, I feel that's where I really was just, who is going to win this race? Can it really beat the Mercedes? Because they, like you said, were just unstoppable. I've really enjoyed the unpredictability of that. And then the midfield even, that battle for 6th place in the championship, what a plot twist, a double podium in Brazil. Granted, there was a red flag and the timing and the rules of changing the tires benefited Alpine. But for them to get that double podium and to claim 6th place, what a shock. They were the slowest car at the beginning of the season, and somehow we even saw Pierre Gasly put him 3rd in the starting grid at Las Vegas. I think this was good. It's going to be remembered as a good season, good competition. I'm hopeful the FIA stuff long-term gets resolved so we're not looking back of, how they messed up 2024 for F1. But overall, I thought it would be very, very well remembered. In the chat room, Edward Hunter, Newey's impact on Aston Martin in 2020 will be limited because he joined mid-season, not enough time to make an impact. All his focus is on the regulation change for 2026 and Honda joining Aston Martin.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. I think I get what you're saying, Joe, and I'm excited for that too. But I think that's more something to look forward to with the regulation changes coming in 2026. Remember, the last time we had regulation changes, Newey with Red Bull, they're the ones that have dominated the last few years. The only thing I don't know, I hope Fernando Alonso hasn't won his last race. I know it's been over a decade at this point. I would love to see him on the top step of the podium one more time. I don't know. I feel like he's going to have to hang on until 2026, though, in which he'll be turning 45 years old. Maybe not too old for a NASCAR driver, but that's ancient in Formula One terms. But then again, if anybody can do it, we've seen the talent that Alonso obviously possesses, and he's even shown it at times this year. Obviously, the car wasn't as strong as it was in 2023, but we'll see. Aston Martin's got a very bright future ahead of them, I think, as well, for sure.
Yeah, Aston Martin is going to be really interesting to see what happens next year, and of course, F1 2025. Cannot wait for it. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. Isha, for Formula E 2025, their season actually started yesterday, and wow, this could be a very chaotic, typical Formula E season.
Yes, Joe, certainly. Mitch Evans made history by becoming the first driver in Formula E to start last and finish first. A brake issue in qualifying prevented him from setting a lap in quali. However, Evans went to the front in a race with 2 red flags and plenty of chaos. He now leads the Formula E point standings. So Ben and Joe, how big of a win was this for Mitch Evans?
Well, it's absolutely massive. I mean, this is a guy that has been close to winning a couple of championships here over the last couple of years, and the last 3 years finishing top 3 in the standings, 2 of those being runner-up finishes, including just last season. And so for him to come out here and as somebody who's seemingly done almost everything there is to do in Formula E but win a championship, one other thing he had never done was win the season opener. He can now check that box off of his list as well. And what better way to start, a season and start mounting a title challenge than going out and picking up maximum points for 25 points for the race victory here in Sao Paulo. So an absolutely massive statement win, and to do it in that fashion, to come from literally last on the grid, the back row, 22nd place to victory here. Great start to the year for Mitch Evans. There's no doubt about that.
One of the big things, as you pointed out, Ben, he's been so close to the championship the last few years. In the last few years, he's had a lousy start to the season. Whether it's crashes, the Jaguar team having issues, he always had a slow start to the year. And I've always said he needs to have a fast start. He cannot have these slow starts and then gain the points throughout the year and come back strong, because he just gets a little bit short towards the end. Well, he did it in a big statement, and I think this is a statement win to put everyone on notice, because if he's going to be this good the entire year, so Mexico City, after Mexico City, consistent, he's going to be hard to beat for this championship, in my opinion. The consistency of Formula E is so important. We've seen drivers win the championship with 1 or 2 wins. Mitch Evans is capable of winning multiple wins. We know the Jaguar is fast. We could have easily seen double podium for Jaguar. Unfortunately, Nick Cassidy crashed out. They done. But Mitch Evans was there, took advantage of the situation, ran a smart race. And wow, is the attack zone, that is just something else now with this all-wheel drive feature. I was just really impressed with whatever he did. And at the end of the day, Mitch Evans, this is the fast start he needed. If he is this strong throughout the year, 1 or 2 bad races, okay, everyone's going to have that. This is Formula E. But he is definitely going to be, in my opinion, hard to beat for this championship.
Yes, certainly. And now on the other side of the coin, there was a big crash for Pascal Wehrlein, who went roll hoop first into the concrete wall. Contact from Nick Cassidy got Wehrlein up and over, landing him upside down. Porsche confirmed that Pascal was okay after the crash, and thankfully, the Gen 3 Evo car kept him safe. After the race, Antonio Felix da Costa emphasized that drivers need to race with respect. So, Joe, does there need to be a change in how the drivers race each other, especially when looking at things from a safety point of view?
Safety is definitely, of course, #1 priority. Formula E has always been sort of this physical street racing. Unique tracks are sometimes narrow, bunches to field up. But now we're seeing this evolution again, where last year we saw a lot of the Peloton style racing, these bigger packs, just racing, essentially saving their energy towards the end and then trying to make the moves. So we didn't see exactly the aggressive physical Formula E of years past. However, the cars are getting faster. This race weekend, we didn't see so much of that pack racing, a little bit of what we were used to. But now that these cars are just as much faster, the track's still tight, narrow, it doesn't take a big hard hit to get someone airborne. That was a slow corner, and we saw what happened. Granted, it looked like from Nick Cassidy's point of view, the steering possibly was broken after contact, couldn't help himself, got into Pascal Wehrlein. But I do think maybe the drivers do need to be a little bit mindful of, okay, this is not the first generation, the second generation, especially of the second generation, where I feel like those cars had more contact than a typical NASCAR race. Now, faster speeds, especially if we have these packed racing, I think they do got to be just a little bit more mindful going forward of how they race each other.
Yeah, I don't have too much to add. I see our friend Ed here in chat. Looks like he's left his thoughts here on what happened. I've read that Cassidy's steering failed, so I think the stewards made the right call not to penalize Nick for that crash. I guess the only thing I'll say is thank goodness Pascal Wehrlein is okay. And again, thank goodness for the halo. I think any and all debate of that was ended with Romain Grosjean's crash in Bahrain in 2020. But I think that device has prevented a lot of injuries and even some fatalities across all forms of motorsports where it's been introduced over the last several years. So thank goodness Pascal's okay. And again, unfortunately, sometimes I think it takes a bit of a close call like that for drivers to wake up and recognize that, at the end of the day, we all need to treat each other with respect out on the racetrack. But hopefully we don't see anything like that going forward the rest of the season here.
Yes, definitely. And now looking at powertrains, the top 3 had different powertrains up towards the front, and there were some surprises. The rookie 20-year-old Taylor Bernard finished 3rd in his first race at McLaren. Jaguar, Porsche, and Nissan powertrains were all towards the front. So Ben and Joe, is any powertrain showing a clear advantage over the others?
Well, again, I'm a more casual Formula E viewer, so I'll certainly defer to Joe for the expert analysis on this one here. But I think if you had to pick one of those 3, it's certainly hard to argue against Jaguar, giving Mitch Evans the ability to go from last to first in the field here. It seems like they've got a rocket ship there. And I see they're leading the manufacturers trophy standings teams championship. Obviously, they're down with Nick Cassidy not scoring any points, and Mitch Evans, obviously 25 puts them in second place, but it looks like McLaren leads that with their 3-4 finish with Taylor Barnard and Sam Bird. Great run for Taylor Barnard, by the way, getting that podium. I think, you could make a case for any of those three. It's still very early in the season. If I had to pick one, though, I guess I would lean towards Jaguar, but I'm anxious to see what Joe has to say.
I'm leaning towards Jaguar, like you say, but it is so close to competition. Nissan, they were looking good. Penalty, unfortunately, that ruined their day. The other driver just essentially not having a good day at all. I like what I saw from Nissan overall. They're going to be hard to beat. They were coming on strong at the end of last season. This year, they're looking like they're right there. Porsche, again, Antonio Felix Acosta, Pascal Wehrlein putting it on pole. And then, of course, Andretti. I was really impressed to see Jake Dennis. Of course, he last year did not win the championship. He did 2 years ago. He was very competitive in the race until issues ruined his day. Good to see him back again. And overall, I think you got to look at what McLaren did from that far in the back of the grid, come towards the front, both vehicles with that Nissan powertrain. I just think it was really shows we got a lot of close competition between those powertrains. I think Jaguar has the upper hand. We saw what Mitch Evans did. Nick Cassidy got towards the front. The Envision team, they seem to be hit or miss sometimes when it comes to their races. But overall, I think the competition is going to be very, very close. In the chat room, Edward Hunter, the big story for me, all 4 Nissan cars being given drive-through for power overuse. We did see that issue. McLaren got bailed out by the red flag and saving their attack modes for later. And Jaguar, the reliability issues. That's what Evans starting late because his shutdown, and Robin Friend's not even starting in his Jaguar because of Envision due to the same issue. I'll be honest, when I saw in qualifying Mitch Evans, he's going to start last, I thought, well, tradition, slow start to a year, but boy, did he prove me wrong. With that said, let's switch over towards the grid ranking, the final standings for the year. Max Verstappen, with a 6th place finish, fell to 5th place, score dropping down below Alex Palou's final score from the NTT IndyCar Series. One of the big things, Carlos Sainz, of course, he is heading off to Williams, but he held onto the final position for Formula One in the grid ranking, holding off the Mercedes driver George Russell. This is only the 2nd time we don't see Lewis Hamilton in the final grid ranking at the end of the year. And of course, 36 race weekend, we'll do it all over again. First Sunday of April in 2025.
All right. Thank you for that, Joe. Certainly a lot to look forward to next year. And as one season ends, another season begins with Formula One and Formula E, respectively. So let's point out the moments that stood out to us most this weekend. We'll start with you, Isha. What is your one shining moment?
My one shining moment from this weekend, I think, is going to have to be the end of the Formula One Grand Prix. When I think it was after Lewis Hamilton did his donuts, and he was talking to Toto Wolff on the radio, and I don't remember exactly what he said, but it was something along the lines of, if we don't win, I hope you win. And I think it was just a really sweet message from Toto Wolff for Hamilton going over to Ferrari. And I think that it's just a very nice way to end his amazing legacy at Mercedes and, everything that him and Toto Wolff have done together.
My shining moment, I would say, probably has to come from Formula E, and it's the story I think a lot of people are talking about. Mitch Evans, last to first. it's been said it's never been done in Formula One, never been done in World Endurance Championship. To come from the dead last place on the grid and claim the win, what a drive by Mitch Evans, a driver that, as I said, year after year, I've been critical about his slow starts. That's not happening this year. If he keeps us up, he's going to be a champion, Mitch Evans.
In the entire history of Formula One, there have been 4 drivers who have completed every lap in a season. Michael Schumacher did it in 2002 when he was on the podium in every race. Lewis Hamilton did it in 2019. Max Verstappen did it last season. Oscar Piastri did it this season. Try as Max Verstappen might have, and try as Oscar Piastri himself might, running into the back of Franco Colapinto and getting a 10-second penalty for that. He came within just a few seconds of losing that at the end. I wonder if there was some team communication from Lando Norris's side. Maybe don't pass your teammate, don't put him a lap down. But Oscar Piastri gets the job done. He finishes on the lead lap, and he has completed 100% of the laps this season. Well done to him. He's now the first non-champion in F1 history to achieve such a feat over the course of a season. That's my one shining moment. And again, I think it speaks to Oscar Piastri's talent, his ability to bring the car home and maximize the points for McLaren. And well done to them again on the Constructors Championship as well. Certainly a shining moment for everybody at the Papaya team. And again, like I said, I'm really looking forward to next season. I think we have a lot of great storylines, on the brink here, mixing up. That's going to give us a season to remember. So we'll keep our eye on that for 2025.
Season to remember, 2025. In the chat room, Edward Hunter, of course, he was on the show yesterday, part of Formula E Zone. Actually, it's been done. McLaren, back in 1983, 23rd and winning it with John Watson from the back to the front. Also, nice to see Wehrlein ending the year in the top 11 of the grid ranking, despite ending the year with a big crash. Of course, Brazil, that'll count towards next year. And Max Verstappen, 17th in Interlagos this season. Some great efforts by a lot of drivers. So overall, a lot to talk about 2024. This is the last time we're on the air for Grid Live. Been a lot of fun. A big thank you to everyone that has been on the air with us. From Kobe, of course, Jackson Lambros, Jackson Todd, Alex Anderson, and of course, thank you, Isha, Azim, Ben Schneider, for joining me on this final episode for 2024. Edward Hunter for yesterday, and Mara as well. Mara Piacentino, the technology gremlins, but we made it work, and she got on the air. And just happy New Year's, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and of course, we might still have some special programming. We still got Grid Tonight coming up, but now the season is winding down, so big effort and a big thank you to everyone. And be sure to subscribe, hit the bell icon so we don't miss any of our programs throughout 2025. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time for Grid Tonight.